Music theory can seem really scary when you first start playing the guitar. Surely all those rock players that you see up on stage don't know any theory because that'll just get in the way of them playing epic rock guitar solos. Do you really need to know any music theory or scales to become a great guitar player? Hey, I'm Owen Vickers from Guitar Mastery Method. We have taught hundreds of thousands of guitar players all around the world, just like you, to really improve their guitar playing. Now, I've heard the argument many times, I don't want to learn any music theory because it's just going to stop my creativity. So is there any advantage to learning music theory? Theory is a very small word that covers a huge subject, all the way from learning the notes of the musical alphabet up to being able to harmonize scales in your head or write entire orchestra scores on a piece of paper without even having an instrument in your hand. And what about scales? Do you need to know the intervals and the patterns for every single scale that exists in the world, cold without having to think about it? Obviously, music theory and scales is a really broad topic, and how far you want to take it really depends on what your goal is. For a classical guitarist or a jazz guitarist, you're going to need to know a lot of theory around scales and chords. If you're playing blues, rock, or pop, then you can get away with not knowing so much theory. So how much theory do you need to know to be a good guitar player? You need to know the musical alphabet first off. It's not that hard. If you know the regular alphabet, this is a much shorter version of it, so should be easier. We just go from the letter A to the letter G with some sharps and flats along the way. Now, there's only two places between A and G where we don't have a sharp and flat. That's between B and C and E and F. All the other letters have a sharp or a flat between them. And that includes when you get to G, you go background to A. So between G and A, there's a sharp or a flat. Next up, you really need to know where the notes on the fretboard are. At a minimum, you need to know all the notes on the low E string and the notes on the A string. You don't need to worry about where the sharps and the flats are, just what are called the natural notes. So A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Because knowing that little bit of knowledge that I dropped on you before about no sharps or flats between B and C and E and F, you'll be able to work out just by knowing the natural notes where the sharps and the flats lie. Knowing the notes on the low E and A strings and a technique called an octave, you'll be able to know where every single note is on the fretboard very quickly. In the description box down below, I'll put a link to a video that I've already done explaining octaves and how to find the notes on the neck. So check that out once you finish this lesson and you'll be knowing all those notes on the fretboard in no time at all. When it comes to scales, you're going to need to learn the major scale. The major scale is the foundation that all other scales and modes are derived from, so knowing it is going to make learning all that other stuff and playing epic lead guitar solos much easier. You're also, speaking of epic lead guitar, going to want to learn the pentatonic scales in all 5 positions on the neck. Speaking of those 5 positions of the pentatonic scale, one thing that you definitely want to learn as a guitar player is the caged system. Now, the caged system is a series of patterns that link up the entire fretboard, which will tell you exactly where to play when you get to each of those pentatonic positions. You also really need to learn the difference between a major and a minor chord. A lot of this is going to come down to your ear, just being able to hear the different tonalities of the major and the minor chord, but a little bit of theory and chord knowledge goes into making that much easier. You'll also want to know how to apply a major or a minor scale to a major or a minor chord. Apart from those things, really important is to work on developing your ear. Now, this doesn't really come under the heading of theory or scales. It's more of a feel and experience thing, I guess you'd say. But being able to hear where the notes should be coming up and combining that with the knowledge that you have of theory and scales will make you a much better guitar player. Let's grab the guitar now and just put some of this into practice. If you're jamming with someone and they play a G chord and they say, hey, take a solo, with no knowledge of theory or scales, you're pretty much in the dark and just blindly going, okay, let's just hunt around for a note. Okay, that sort of works, cool. And from there, okay, got a couple of notes I can use there. I'll start building a solo. Just by having a little bit of scale knowledge, you can bypass that whole guessing phase and just look a lot more professional and be able to get into your solos a lot quicker and start ripping out some licks that are going to impress everyone that is listening to you. So when someone plays that G chord and gives me the point, start playing, I know at a bare minimum that this note is G, 3rd fret of the low E string. I also know that an octave up from there, I've got another G. So 5th fret of the D string is another G. So I know what's called a root note. Now, a root note is a great way to start or end a solo because it's always going to sound right to your ear. If I'm playing a G chord and I play a G note by itself over the top of it, it's going to sound pretty much perfect. It's going to be what your ear is expecting to hear. Now, if someone is playing a G minor chord, through my knowledge of theory and scales, I know that I can play a G minor scale. So a G minor pentatonic scale will work perfectly over a G minor chord. If they're playing a G major chord, I can play a G major pentatonic or a G major scale. So just knowing those tiny little bits of knowledge gives me a great foundation and a great starting point to jump off into a solo. And knowing the patterns and the scales that fit the names of those particular scales I've just mentioned means that I'm not having to guess around and just trying to fumble through the first couple of notes and really sort of stick to that pattern for my entire solo. It really opens up the fretboard and gives me a lot of options for playing solos. Chord theory knowledge tells me that if a song has a C major chord, a D major chord, and an E minor chord, like I just played there, that I can play a lead solo using a G major scale, because those chords are all in the key of G major. So that's just a little bit of chord knowledge that I've got, which gives me a great point to jump off into a solo, knowing that I can play the G major scale over those chords. Knowing the shapes and the patterns of all these different scales is really good knowledge to have. It means that if you're playing a solo and you get a little bit lost, which happens to us all sometimes, you know that there's certain base points you can come back to, such as, let's just say, a pentatonic, G-shape pentatonic pattern. You just know that if you're playing over an A minor chord, I know my G-shaped pentatonic pattern sits right here. So if I get a little bit lost during my solo, I can just come back to that home base and know exactly where I can go to from there. I really hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Theory isn't something to be shunned away and be scared of. Just having a little bit of knowledge, musical alphabet, the cage system, different scales like the major scale, the pentatonic scale, knowing the notes of the fretboard. It's not that much work to put in, but it will pay off in the long run for your entire guitar playing life. Please do go ahead and click the subscribe button down below and the notification bell icon so that you'll be advised of our new lessons as soon as they come out. In the description box down below, I'm going to put a link to a free guitar cheat sheet. This is going to tell you exactly where you need to play to solo in any key. This is going to be incredibly valuable information for you. Every time you're jamming with other musicians or to a backing track, you know exactly where to play on the guitar fretboard. See you in the next lesson.